Scene 1. Before there was France, before the castles, the kings, and the revolutions, there was only Gaul, a land of forests, rivers, and restless tribes. If you stood here 2,000 years ago, you would not hear the French language. You would hear the wind moving through endless oak trees, the cries of warriors, the sound of drums echoing from the hills. Gaul was not one country. It was a patchwork of Celtic tribes, each with its own chief, its own gods, and its own warriors. They built wooden fortresses on hilltops and lived by the sword. Their world was filled with mystery, sacred groves, ritual fires, and stories passed through song. Among these tribes were the Ayadui, the Arverni, and the Belgae. They were skilled farmers, metalworkers, and traders. Their villages stood near rivers like the Seine and the Loire, where they traded salt, amber, and weapons with Greek and Roman merchants far to the south. The people of Gaul believed in powerful spirits, gods of thunder, rivers, and the harvest. They worshipped in nature, not temples. Their priests, called druids, were teachers, healers, and judges. To the Romans, Gaul was wild and dangerous, but also rich and full of promise, and soon Rome came to claim it. The Roman invasion. In the year 58 BC, a Roman general named Julius Caesar crossed the Alps with his legions. He said he came to protect Rome's allies, but in truth he came for conquest. Caesar faced dozens of tribes who refused to kneel. For 8 long years, war burned across Gaul. Villages were destroyed, fields turned to ash. Tens of thousands were killed or enslaved. But out of this chaos, a hero rose, a young chieftain named Vercingetorix of the Arverni tribe. He was tall, proud, and brave. For the first time in history, he united the warring tribes of Gaul under one banner. He led his people against Rome, burning towns so Caesar could not feed his army, ambushing Roman soldiers in the forests, fighting for every inch of land. The final battle came at Alesia. Surrounded and outnumbered, Vercingetorix and his warriors fought until the end. When defeat became certain, he rode to Caesar's camp, threw down his weapons, and surrendered, not as a coward, but as a leader saving his people. Caesar's victory in Gaul made him famous, and made Rome the master of this land. Gaul becomes Roman. After the conquest, Rome changed everything. They built roads, bridges, and stone cities. They introduced Latin, laws, and new ways of life. Farmers learned to grow grapes and olives. Merchants traded across the empire. Roman soldiers built walls and outposts from the Channel to the Pyrenees. One of their new towns was called Lutetia, built on an island in the river Seine. Centuries later, this would become Paris, the heart of France. Over time, Roman culture and Celtic tradition mixed together. The Gauls adopted Latin, Roman clothes, and Roman gods. But deep in the countryside, the old beliefs survived. You could still find druids whispering prayers to the forest and the moon. For nearly 500 years, Gaul remained part of the Roman Empire, peaceful, prosperous, and loyal. But Rome itself would not last forever. As the empire weakened in the 4th and 5th centuries, its armies withdrew. Barbarian tribes, Franks, Visigoths, and Vandals, moved in. The Roman world crumbled, and from its ruins, a new kingdom would rise. The Franks would give their name to the land, and from that name, France would be born. The rise of the Franks and the birth of France, 400 AD, 987 AD. The kingdom of the Franks, Clovis, united many Frankish tribes under his rule. He fought rival leaders and conquered city after city until almost all of northern Gaul bowed to him. But his greatest victory was not won on the battlefield. In the year 496 AD, after winning a battle near Tolbiac, Clovis looked to the heavens. He had prayed to the Christian God for victory, and when he won, he kept his promise. Clovis was baptized a Christian, along with 3,000 of his soldiers. This single moment changed history. By converting to Christianity, Clovis gained the support of the Roman Catholic Church and the remaining Gallo-Roman population. The Church saw him as a savior, a ruler who could protect the faith in a dark and violent age, and the Franks saw him as a divine king. This was the birth of a new nation, a Christian kingdom that would one day be called France. The Merovingian kings. After Clovis's death, his sons inherited his lands and his crown. This was the beginning of the Merovingian dynasty, named after Clovis's grandfather, Merovech. They ruled from the city of Soissons, and their long hair became a symbol of royal power. For 2 centuries, the Merovingians expanded their influence across Gaul. But as time passed, their kings grew weak and lazy, more interested in luxury than leadership. Real power slowly shifted into the hands of powerful nobles known as mayors of the palace, the king's chief administrators. Among these nobles, one family stood out, the Carolingians. And from this family would rise a man destined to shape Europe forever. To the Carolingians and Charles the Great. The year was 732. A Muslim army from Spain crossed into France, sweeping northward. It seemed unstoppable, until a Frankish leader named Charles Martel, known as the Hammer, stood in its path. At the Battle of Tours, Charles and his army defeated the invaders, saving Christian Europe from conquest. Charles became a hero. His grandson would become a legend. That grandson was Charlemagne, Charles the Great. When Charlemagne became king in 768, he dreamed not just of ruling the Franks, but of rebuilding the glory of the Roman Empire itself. For nearly 50 years, he fought campaign after campaign, from Spain to Germany to Italy, uniting most of Western Europe under one crown. Charlemagne built schools, churches, and roads. He promoted education and culture, what historians now call the Carolingian Renaissance. Under his rule, learning returned to Europe after centuries of darkness. On Christmas Day in the year 800, Charlemagne entered St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. There the Pope placed a golden crown on his head and declared him Emperor of the Romans. For the first time since ancient times, Western Europe had an emperor again, and his empire was born from France. The empire divided, but as all empires do, Charlemagne's empire began to weaken after his death. His sons and grandsons fought over the throne, dividing the land among themselves. The empire split into 3 kingdoms, and the western part became known as the Kingdom of the Franks, or West Francia. This land, stretching from the Pyrenees to the English Channel, would slowly evolve into modern France. In the 9th and 10th centuries, new enemies appeared, the Vikings. They came in long ships, raiding towns along the rivers, burning villages, and demanding gold. But in time, even they became part of France's story. A Viking leader named Rollo accepted land from the French king, land that would become Normandy, the land of the Northmen. By the year 987, the Carolingian line had faded, and a new dynasty rose to power, the Capetians, beginning with Hugh Capet. He ruled from Paris, a city that would grow from a small Roman settlement into the heart of France. And so, after centuries of war, invasions, and rebirth, France had finally emerged from the shadows, a kingdom ready to take its place among the great powers of medieval Europe. Medieval France, knights, castles, and crusades, 987 to 1453. The rise of the Capetians, Hugh Capet's descendants, ruled for generations. Kings like Philip I, Louis VI, and Louis VII expanded royal power step by step. They built alliances with the church, founded monasteries, and used marriage to bring new lands under their control. In those days, castles rose across the countryside, strongholds of stone that symbolized authority. Inside their walls, knights trained for battle, minstrels sang of heroism, and noble families ruled their domains. But beyond France's borders, a new call was echoing across Christendom, the call of the Crusades. The Crusades and the power of faith. In the year 1095, Pope Urban II called upon the knights of Europe to take up arms and march to the Holy Land. He promised salvation to those who fought to reclaim Jerusalem. From France, thousands answered the call. Noblemen like Godfrey of Bouillon and Raymond of Toulouse led armies eastward, crossing mountains and deserts, driven by faith and glory. For nearly 2 centuries, French knights fought in the Crusades, winning lands, building castles, and spreading their influence across the Mediterranean. Even kings joined these holy wars. Louis IX, known later as Saint Louis, led 2 crusades himself. He was remembered not only as a warrior, but as a man of faith, justice, and peace. To this day, he remains one of France's most beloved kings. But while the knights fought in distant lands, another enemy was rising much closer to home, across the English Channel. The Hundred Years' War. In 1337, a long and brutal conflict began between France and England. It would last more than a century, a war that would define nations and create legends. At its heart was a simple question: who had the right to rule France? The English kings claimed the French crown through old family ties. The French kings, of course, refused. And so began the Hundred Years' War, a struggle of dynasties, ambition, and pride. The early years were a disaster for France. English longbows crushed French knights at Crécy and Agincourt. Villages burned, famine spread, and hope seemed lost. But in France's darkest hour, a light appeared. A young peasant girl from the village of Domremy. Her name was Jeanne d'Arc, Joan of Arc. Joan of Arc, the girl who saved France. Joan claimed she heard voices from God commanding her to save France. At first, people laughed at her, but her courage and faith moved even hardened soldiers. At just 17, she led the French army to victory at Orléans, lifting a siege that had lasted months. Her bravery inspired the nation. She helped crown Charles VII as king in the Cathedral of Reims, the same place where France's kings had been crowned for centuries. But her story ended in tragedy. Captured by the English and accused of witchcraft, Joan was burned at the stake in 1431. She was only 19, yet her death gave France something no army could win: unity. Her spirit became a symbol of resistance and national pride. And by 1453, the English were finally driven out of almost all of France. The Hundred Years' War had ended. France was scarred but victorious. A new sense of identity was born: the idea of a single nation, united under one king and one flag. The Renaissance and the rise of absolute kings, 1453 to 1715. The Renaissance begins. In the 1400s and 1500s, ideas from Italy swept across Europe, ideas about beauty, science, and human strength. Artists painted with new colors and light. Scholars rediscovered ancient books and studied nature instead of fear. And in France, kings became not just rulers, but patrons of culture. One of these kings was Francis I. He loved art, architecture, and ideas. He brought Italian artists to France, even Leonardo da Vinci, who spent his final years painting and dreaming in the Loire Valley. Under Francis, France built palaces filled with paintings and gardens. The Château de Chambord, with its tall spires and spiral staircase, became a symbol of a new France, rich, proud, and full of imagination. But while art and beauty flourished, Europe was also being torn apart by something dangerous: religion. The wars of religion. In the 1500s, the Protestant Reformation spread across the continent. Many people began to question the authority of the Catholic Church. In France, Protestants were called Huguenots, and they wanted freedom to worship in their own way. But France was still a deeply Catholic nation. Tension grew between neighbors, friends, and even families. Soon the country descended into chaos. From 1562 to 1598, France suffered through the wars of religion. 8 bloody conflicts between Catholics and Protestants. Cities were burned, villages were destroyed, thousands were killed, including in one of the darkest nights in French history, the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre in 1572, when thousands of Protestants were murdered in Paris. It seemed France would never know peace again. But then came a man who would heal the wounds, a king of both courage and wisdom. His name was Henry IV. Henry IV, the king who brought peace. Henry IV was born a Protestant but became king of a Catholic nation. To unite his people, he made a choice that would change history. He converted to Catholicism, saying, "Paris is well worth a mass," but his heart remained open. In 1598, he signed the Edict of Nantes, granting Protestants the right to worship freely. At last, peace returned to France. Henry rebuilt cities, restored farms, and encouraged trade. He cared for his people, famously saying he wanted every family in France to have a chicken in the pot every Sunday. His reign was short but filled with hope, until he was assassinated in 1610. Yet Henry's vision lived on, guiding France towards stability and greatness. Was the age of Louis XIV, the Sun King. After Henry came one of the most famous kings in all history, Louis XIV, the Sun King. He ruled for 72 years, one of the longest reigns ever. Louis believed that all power came from him. He once said, "I am the state." He built the magnificent Palace of Versailles, a place so grand it stunned the world. Golden halls, endless gardens, fountains that danced in the sunlight, all designed to show the glory of France and its king. Under Louis XIV, France became the richest, most powerful, and most admired nation in Europe. French art, fashion, and language spread across the continent. The king's court set the standard for elegance and authority. But such splendor came at a cost. Wars drained the treasury. Taxes fell hard on the poor. And while the palace glittered, many of France's people lived in hunger. Still, Louis left behind a legacy of strength, a France united under one crown, one faith, and one symbol, the sun. Revolution and the rise of Napoleon, 1715 to 1815. The spark of revolution. By the late 1780s, France was collapsing under debt. Bad harvests left families starving. The government owed money from endless wars, even from helping the American colonies win their independence. Taxes crushed the poor, while nobles and clergy paid almost nothing. In 1789, King Louis XVI called a meeting, the Estates General, to solve the crisis. But instead of solving anything, it lit the fuse of rebellion. Representatives of the Third Estate, the common people, broke away. They met in a simple indoor tennis court and swore an oath that they would not rest until France had a new constitution. It became known as the Tennis Court Oath and the beginning of the French Revolution. Soon Paris erupted. On July 14, 1789, an angry crowd stormed the Bastille, a royal fortress that symbolized tyranny. The fall of the Bastille became the symbol of freedom, and it still is today, celebrated as Bastille Day. To liberty, equality, fraternity. The revolution spread like a tidal wave. The king's power collapsed. Nobles fled. The National Assembly declared the rights of man and citizen, announcing that all men were born free and equal. But freedom came with fire. In 1792, France became a republic. King Louis XVI was put on trial for betraying his country. He was executed by guillotine, followed soon by his queen, Marie Antoinette. The revolution had turned dark. Rival groups fought for control. In Paris, suspicion ruled, and the reign of terror began. Led by Robespierre, thousands were executed in the name of liberty. Even those who had once fought for freedom found themselves under the blade. France bled, yet out of that chaos, a new kind of leader was about to emerge. The rise of Napoleon Bonaparte. His name was Napoleon Bonaparte, a brilliant young officer from the island of Corsica. He was ambitious, fearless, and obsessed with glory. While the revolution tore the nation apart, Napoleon brought order through discipline and strength. In 1799, he staged a coup d'etat, taking control of France. The people, exhausted from war and fear, accepted him as a hero. He promised peace and delivered power. By 1804, Napoleon crowned himself Emperor of the French in the great Cathedral of Notre Dame. In that moment, the dream of the revolution, equality and freedom, had transformed into a new kind of empire. Yet Napoleon carried those revolutionary ideals across Europe. His armies marched from Spain to Russia, spreading modern laws, education, and nationalism. For a time, it seemed no one could stop him. But like all empires, his reached too far. In 1812, his invasion of Russia ended in disaster. The snow, hunger, and cold destroyed his mighty army. By 1815, after defeat at Waterloo, Napoleon's dream of empire was over. He was exiled far away, to a lonely island in the Atlantic. There he spent his final years remembering the country that had once crowned him, and the revolution that had made him. Empires, Revolutions, and the Modern Republic, 1815 to 1914. The fires of revolution return. In 1830, those dreams explode again. Paris rises in revolt. Barricades, gunfire, and the tricolor flag waving once more. The Bourbon king is forced to flee, and a new monarch, Louis Philippe, becomes the citizen king. He promises to rule for the people. But over time, the rich grow richer, the poor grow poor, and the same cries echo through the city streets. 18 years later, in 1848, the spark returns. Another wave of revolutions sweeps across Europe, and France is once again at the heart of it. Workers, poets, and students fill the streets demanding liberty. The king abdicates, and the Second Republic is born. For a moment, hope fills the air. But revolutions are unpredictable. In just a few years, a new figure steps into the spotlight, a man who promises order after years of chaos. His name is Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, the nephew of the great emperor. He wins the presidency in a landslide. But soon his ambition grows. In 1852, he declares himself Emperor Napoleon III, and France becomes an empire once again. A new empire, a new Paris. This time, it's not just about conquest, it's about creation. Napoleon III wants to modernize France. Under his rule, Paris is transformed. The narrow, crowded streets give way to the grand boulevards we know today. Architect Baron Haussmann rebuilds the city, bridges, parks, and shining white buildings that stretch toward the sky. Paris becomes the city of light, the center of art, fashion, and progress. The railways connect the nation. Industry grows. France looks forward, confident, modern, unstoppable. But beyond the beauty, danger stirs. The emperor's ambitions in Europe draw the nation into war once again. The fall of the Second Empire. In 1870, Napoleon III challenges Prussia, led by the rising power of Otto von Bismarck. The Franco-Prussian War begins and ends in disaster. The French army is crushed, the emperor is captured, and the German Empire is born in the halls of Versailles, the very heart of French pride. Paris falls into chaos. Hungry, angry citizens form the Paris Commune, a radical government run by workers. For 2 brutal months, the city becomes a battlefield. When the French army retakes Paris, thousands are killed. Smoke fills the air. The Tuileries Palace burns to ashes. But from these ruins, something powerful is born: the Third Republic. The Third Republic and the birth of modern France. By 1875, France has chosen a new path. No more emperors, no more kings. The Republic becomes law. It's not perfect. Governments rise and fall quickly. Yet for the first time, democracy begins to take root. Education spreads. Science, art, and invention bloom. Names like Claude Monet, Auguste Rodin, and Marie Curie become symbols of French genius. The Eiffel Tower rises above Paris, a shining symbol of modernity and hope. France becomes not just a nation of soldiers, but of thinkers, artists, and dreamers. Its influence stretches across the world, in fashion, in literature, in culture. But beneath the light, shadows remain. As Europe races toward progress, rivalries grow sharper, and in the distance, dark clouds begin to gather once again. The year is 1914, and the world is about to change forever. World Wars in the Age of Recovery, 1914 to 1945. World War I, the Great War, 1914 to 1918. In the first days of the war, France expects a quick victory. Soldiers in bright uniforms march to the front, singing patriotic songs. But the reality they face is like nothing anyone has ever seen. The war turns into a deadly stalemate. Trenches carved deep into the earth from Belgium to Switzerland. Mud, rats, and fear become daily companions. For 4 long years, France becomes a battlefield. The names of these places will never be forgotten. Verdun, the Somme, Marne, where courage and suffering reach their limits. At Verdun, French soldiers repeat a single phrase: "They shall not pass." For 10 brutal months, they hold the line against endless German attacks. The cost is unthinkable. Over 700,000 casualties in one battle alone. Behind the front, the nation bleeds. Women take over farms and factories, replacing the men who never return. Entire towns vanish under shell fire. Yet somehow, the French spirit endures. In 1918, with help from the Allies, Britain, America, and others, France finally pushes the German army back. The war ends with the armistice of November 11th, 1918. Millions are dead. A generation is lost, but France is victorious. Between two wars, hope and fragility, 1919 to 1939. After the war, France dreams of peace. The scars are deep, but the people rebuild. New art and ideas bloom. Paris becomes the center of creativity. Writers like Ernest Hemingway, painters like Picasso, and musicians fill the city with life. The 1920s are remembered as les années folles, the crazy years. But beneath the music and laughter, there is fear. The world economy crashes in 1929. Factories close, jobs vanish, and anger rises again. In Germany, a dangerous voice begins to rise. A man named Adolf Hitler, who promises revenge and power. By the late 1930s, storm clouds gather again. France hopes the new League of Nations can keep peace, but diplomacy fails. When Germany invades Poland in 1939, France declares war once more. The nightmare has returned. World War II, Occupation and Resistance, 1939 to 1945. In 1940, German tanks sweep across Europe with terrifying speed. France, still healing from the last war, cannot stop them. Within 6 weeks, Paris falls. The Nazi flag rises over the Eiffel Tower. Half the nation is occupied. The other half is ruled by a puppet government in Vichy. But not all of France surrenders. From London, a tall, stubborn soldier named Charles de Gaulle refuses to give up. Through a BBC broadcast, he calls out to his people, "France has lost a battle, but France has not lost the war." In secret, brave men and women across France form the resistance. They sabotage trains, hide refugees, and pass secret messages. Ordinary citizens become heroes in the shadows, risking everything for freedom. Meanwhile, the occupied streets of Paris grow silent and dark. Jews are rounded up. Fear rules every corner, but hope never dies. Liberation and Rebirth, 1944 to 1945. On June 6, 1944, the Allied forces land on the beaches of Normandy. American, British, Canadian, and Free French troops fight their way through fire and steel. Village by village, they liberate the country. The resistance rises up, joining the final push for freedom. By August 1944, the impossible happens. Paris is free. Crowds fill the streets, waving flags, tears and joy mixing in the air. Charles de Gaulle marches triumphantly down the Champs-Élysées, declaring, "Paris, Paris outraged, Paris broken, Paris martyred, but Paris liberated." The war finally ends in 1945. France, scarred but unbroken, stands among the victors once again. It has survived 2 world wars in one lifetime. Its cities will rebuild. Its people will never forget. Rebuilding the Fifth Republic and modern France, 1945 to 2025. Rebuilding a nation, 1945 to 1958. In the years after World War II, France must begin from the ground up. Factories are gone, bridges destroyed, and the economy is in crisis. Yet hope burns bright. With help from the Marshall Plan, money and supplies arrive from America. New roads are built, new industries rise, and schools reopen. Women who had played a vital role during the war demand their place in society, and in 1944, French women finally gain the right to vote. Politically, however, France struggles. The Fourth Republic, formed in 1946, brings democracy, but also confusion. Governments rise and fall rapidly. There are too many parties, too many disagreements. At the same time, France faces painful challenges abroad. Its colonies in Indochina and Algeria are fighting for independence. The empire that once stretched across the world is beginning to crumble. By 1958, the country faces crisis once again. The war in Algeria divides the nation. Protests fill the streets. Many fear France could collapse into chaos. And then, one man returns. With the rise of the Fifth Republic and de Gaulle's return, 1958 to 1969. That man is Charles de Gaulle, the hero of the resistance. He returns to power, determined to save France from political disaster. Under his leadership, a new system is born, the Fifth Republic, with a strong presidency and a stable government. De Gaulle's vision is clear. France must be independent, modern, and proud. He pushes for nuclear power, builds a space program, and restores confidence. In 1962, France ends the Algerian War, granting Algeria its independence. It is a painful moment, the end of the French colonial empire, but also a new beginning. The 1960s become a decade of transformation. Highways, television, and technology spread across the nation. France becomes one of the world's modern powers again, but not everyone is happy. In May 1968, millions of students and workers protest, demanding freedom, equality, and change. The streets of Paris are filled with banners and dreams. De Gaulle eventually steps down in 1969, leaving behind both admiration and controversy. A modern European power, 1970 to 2000. After de Gaulle, France moves forward under new leaders. The country continues to grow, rebuilding its cities, strengthening its economy, and shaping its future. France becomes a founding member of the European Economic Community, the first step toward today's European Union. During the 1970s and 80s, life changes rapidly. Color TV fills homes, French cinema flourishes, and brands like Renault and Air France carry the French name worldwide. In 1981, François Mitterrand becomes the first socialist president of the Fifth Republic. He introduces social reforms, expands education, and builds symbols of a new France, like the Louvre Pyramid and the Grande Arche de la Défense in Paris. By the 1990s, France stands strong once again, a democracy, a cultural beacon, and a leader in Europe. But new challenges are waiting. Globalization, technology, and immigration reshape society. France in the 21st century, 2000 to 2025. The new millennium brings both pride and uncertainty. France joins the Eurozone, adopting the euro in 2002. The world becomes more connected and more unpredictable. In the 2010s, France faces waves of political and social change. Terrorist attacks test the nation's unity. Protests like the Yellow Vests movement demand justice and reform. But through every storm, the French people continue to stand together, guided by the same three words written long ago: liberté, égalité, fraternité. Culturally, France remains a global heart of fashion, art, and cuisine. Its films win awards, its cities draw millions of visitors, and its technology sector grows rapidly. From Paris to Marseille, from the Alps to Normandy, the country balances tradition and progress. By 2025, France stands as one of the world's leading nations, a founding member of the European Union, a defender of human rights, and a voice for democracy on the world stage. The empire is long gone, but its legacy in language, art, and ideas continues to shape the planet.